All right, let's jump right in. Welcome to our latest explainer. Today, we're unpacking the incredibly complex and honestly absolutely fascinating world of biodiversity conservation. I mean, we all know the planet needs saving, right? But how exactly is that executed on the ground? Let's figure it out. It's a question we constantly ask ourselves whenever we see those heartbreaking clips of endangered tigers or, shrinking rainforests. We definitely have the emotional drive to save these species, for sure. But what is the actual boots-on-the-ground game plan? Well, to really understand that, we need to look directly at the concrete mechanisms of how this is executed, both globally and locally. So here's our roadmap for this explainer. We're going to cover 1, the 2 paths to conservation. 2, their pros, cons, and trade-offs. 3, the global protection standard. 4, India's specific conservation landscape. 5, a deep dive into parks and reserves. And finally, 6, marine and biosphere frontiers. Okay, starting off with Section 1, the 2 paths to conservation, In-Situ and Ex-Situ. First up is in-situ conservation. Basically, the core concept here is location, location, location. This strategy is all about protecting plants and animals right where they naturally live and thrive. By setting up things like biosphere reserves or national parks, you're effectively drawing a giant protective boundary around a natural habitat. The whole shebang, the entire ecological web stays completely intact exactly as nature intended. On the flip side, we have ex-situ conservation. Now, this means stepping in to protect biodiversity by relocating it strictly outside of its natural habitat. We usually do this as a last resort, when an environment is just no longer safe or population numbers are critically low. To pull this off, scientists use highly secure facilities. We're talking gene and seed banks, zoos, and specialized botanical gardens. Moving on to Section 2. Let's talk about the pros, cons, and trade-offs, because neither of these options is a perfect silver bullet. Let's look at in-situ first. While it's fantastic because it keeps ecosystems functioning in their natural state and actually opens doors for sustainable land use, it definitely carries some heavy risks. Endangered habitats might become severely fragmented. That means the protected area simply isn't large enough for certain species to survive long-term. Plus, you're still leaving these animals vulnerable to poachers, and even just the natural diseases that already plague that specific environment. Now, ex-situ basically flips that entire script. Here, organisms are totally locked away from wild predation and poaching. Their health is carefully monitored, and modern reproductive tech can really boost their numbers. But the catch? Well, it drastically limits genetic diversity. And honestly, it is unbelievably expensive to maintain. Moreover, animals bred in these artificial conditions can start to behave abnormally. So if they are ever reintroduced into the wild, they often struggle big time to survive. All right, Section 3, the Global Protection Standard, known as the IUCN categories. To actually organize all this on a global level, the International Union for Conservation of Nature, the IUCN, created a standard utilizing 6 specific categories. This ranges from Category 1, which are strictly managed wilderness reserves, meant primarily for science, all the way down to Category 6, which manages protected areas while actually allowing humans to sustainably use the natural resources there. It's essentially a sliding scale, cleverly designed to balance absolute lockdown protection with human interaction. So, what does this look like in practice? That brings us to Section 4, India's conservation landscape. In a megadiverse country like India, the absolute backbone of this entire effort is the Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. But, it doesn't just operate in a vacuum. It requires a really robust web of legislation, including things like the Forest Act of 1927 and the Biological Diversity Act of 2002. Crucially, it also integrates the Forest Rights Act of 2006, which actually recognizes the rights of traditional forest dwellers. It's like a giant puzzle, a highly complex legal ecosystem specifically designed to protect a biological one. And all of this monumental legal effort translates to exactly 5.28% of India's massive landmass being legally dedicated as protected areas. To put that into perspective, when you factor in the incredibly high population density and the rapid economic development happening in India, dedicating over 5% of the entire country exclusively to nature, that is a staggering geographical commitment. Let's break down the data for a second. As of 2023, India maintains an astounding 998 protected areas. That covers over 173,000 square kilometers. The vast majority of this protected land is made up of wildlife sanctuaries and national parks, and together they really do the heavy lifting to make up that 5% of the country's total coverage.
Let's zoom in a bit more for Section 5, a deep dive into parks and reserves and the nuances of how they're protected.
First up, we have sanctuaries. These make up the bulk of India's protected lands, with 567 in total. Get this, the Andaman and Nicobar Islands alone have 97 of them. Sanctuaries are fundamentally designed for compromise. They're relatively flexible. While they are declared specifically to protect critical ecological zones, they don't entirely lock out human presence. They actually allow for some restricted human activities and even permit the continuation of certain land rates during settlement.
National parks, however, well, they're an entirely different story. There are 106 of these in India, with Jim Corbett National Park standing as India's historic first. These parks have strict, clearly defined boundaries and are completely off-limits to unpermitted human activity. And here's the really important part. Structurally, a national park cannot be downgraded to a sanctuary. Once it's a park, that's it. It locks in the absolute highest tier of territorial protection.
Now, as conservation evolved, the government realized they needed slightly more flexible categories. So, in 2002, India added two brand new types of reserves. First, government-owned conservation reserves. These are uninhabited, but uniquely allow local communities to use them for subsistence. And second, community reserves. These are actually privately owned lands that communities voluntarily agree to protect. This was a brilliant, real game changer of a tactical move to include local populations directly in the conservation game plan. Finally, we reach Section 6, Marine and Biosphere Frontiers. Because, as we know, conservation doesn't just stop at the shoreline. India vigorously protects its coasts through 128 marine protected areas. Basically, any protected area falling within 500 meters of the high tide line into the marine environment joins this network. We're talking about guarding critical reefs, mangroves, and seagrass beds. This even includes 4 specific marine national parks, like the incredibly diverse Gulf of Kutch and the Gulf of Mannar. And hovering above all of these localized efforts sits the overarching concept of biosphere reserves. Launched globally by UNESCO back in the 1970s, these aren't just about locking nature away in some untouched vault. Actually, scratch that. It's more like they're designed as active learning places for sustainable development. The goal is to establish a scientifically backed, perfectly balanced relationship between people and their environments, essentially proving that humans and nature can coexist and thrive together. So, looking at all these incredible strategies, from the global IUCN standards to strict national parks to community-integrated reserves, we're left with the ultimate question to ponder. As human populations grow and economies rapidly expand, can we truly maintain this delicate balance between human progress and natural preservation? The frameworks are clearly there, but the execution, well, that's entirely up to us. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring.